Your upcoming book is Norse-Gaelic Paganism, Viking and Irish Myth and Magic. This is very exciting, and I want to dig into a lot of this stuff. So I want to get to some historical context with you and what brings you to this subject matter. So let's just start off with, who are you, Annie Humphrey?
Oh, that's the big question, isn't it? So, I am from New Jersey originally, and I'm back here again. But I did spend some years in Ireland, 2 years in Cork, and four and a half years in Dublin. Had to come home due to the pandemic. But I've spent quite a lot of time there, as well as traveled all over Isle of Man a number of times, the Orkneys, Norway, Sweden, Iceland a couple of times. So while I am a Yank and American, I definitely have lots of experience working in a European context and getting to know the spirits of the land there as much as the spirits of the land here.
What drove you to decide to kind of devote your, I mean, when you're getting a PhD and when you're doing all the scholarship and then ultimately this book and probably forthcoming books, is this something that you felt a drive towards, or was there a pivotal point in which you said, I'm going to do this with a lot of my time?
It's a great question. And I do have colleagues who have wonderful stories of when they decided to become a medievalist or when they decided to become a heathen or a pagan. But for me, it's in my blood. I was raised Catholic, but it was a very casual Catholicism. And to me, it was very cool how there was a saint for every problem. So I call myself a lifelong polytheist because while I didn't discover Wicca and discover neo-paganism until I was in my around when I was 12 years old. Even as a small kid, I loved this idea that, you could have a problem and you'd look up and figure out what saint to talk to, and you could talk to that saint and they would intercede for you. I loved this idea of a world with multiple spirits in it who could take an interest in you, but you had to approach them first, right? So for me, I've always been a polytheist. I've always been someone who believes in the numinous and believes in things around me having their own souls, their own agendas, their own ideas. And I really wish I could point to a single exciting anecdote about when I knew that Norse-Gaelic paganism was it for me. But no specific point. Just the more I studied, the more I felt like I was coming home to it. In some ways, I kind of had to make that home. I kind of had to make that space. This book is the product of years, in some ways, decades of carving out that space and welcoming other people into the space too.
You really make this approachable because Scandinavian dialect and Icelandic stuff, I find in particular, which you say is easier, is intimidating when you look at some of these words because they're so just massive. On one of your presentations, I was doing the sounding out. Of course, this is here recently in the last 2 days, but I felt like coming away from that, I could do this. I could spend some time and feel comfortable speaking Icelandic, actually, or sounding this out. A lot of the stuff is very almost intuitive. Now, the Gaelic stuff is different, I've found, and I have a lot of that in my own genealogy, a lot of, but more of the Scotch side.
Mhm.
So it is interesting looking back through one's tree and seeing these names and how they became modernized and then Americanized when you get here, and yet they're so different from where they started. This is fascinates me. I know this isn't actually your point of interest, but this whole idea is important when we're looking at scholarship, looking back. And this is your basis. I mean, you dealt with these sagas, you're reading this information through these source materials that you cite. You're well cited. Did you have any trouble actually picking up this dialect from the beginning? I'm assuming you read fluently in these, in Icelandic, you were reading the Icelandic dialect, the sagas, right, from the source.
Right. Well, full confession, I'm a lot better reader than I am speaker. I I can read near fluently, but when it comes to speech, when it comes to trying to keep up with Icelandic and Irish language rappers, it's a little bit harder for me to catch up with the words. So, no, like don't get this idea that I'm this massive polyglot. I'm really a monolinguist, an American monolinguist who can, toddle their way through some really basic Icelandic and really basic Irish. But reading, yes, it is something that through many years of practice I've been able to hone. But again, I want to really emphasize for your readers that it's not that there's like some secret web of language acquisition that only scholars can access. It really is, out there. There are books, there are online resources. It's not some arcane knowledge. You can really learn these languages even from the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, and that's what feels so approachable. Also, this to me, and why I'm going into this a little bit, it grounds you into, for me, it grounds you as an author into something that feels like I'm listening and I'm learning and I'm reading from someone who has studied source material in its original language. And I do look for that kind of thing. Don't get me wrong. I love the far out intuitive stuff. I'm a deeply intuitive person and I can I can pull up to all that. I love it, but I really do look to the good scholars. And so this is something I think that nobody could argue with regarding you. And then just to bounce back, I wasn't raised religious, but I'll tell you what, I have grown such a love for Catholicism, devoid of all the politics, just looking at it on its own and the saint thing and how approachable they made that for people of different cultures and how intense it is when you're talking to people who have a connection to a certain saint. Or for me, I in general love the great goddess, and
Mhm.
Mary is how she lived through Catholicism and then all the many iterations of her or fragments through different saints and all that. Whereas I'm not a Catholic, one may be thinking that when they see all the Marys I house, the antique Mary.
Well, I do have to give a shout out to my current host is Georgian Court University. I'm a visiting professor here, and they're a Catholic university, but they were founded by an order of nuns called the Sisters of Mercy, actually founded in Dublin. So there's kind of an Irish connection there.
Yeah.
But at Georgian Court, we take mercy really seriously. Social justice, social justice work is mercy work, as we say. There's no politics. There's no, we have this big anti-racism week going on in a couple of months. Like we take caring for everybody, caring for different genders, caring for different sexualities. And it's really cool because obviously, there's quite a lot to complain about the Catholic Church, but at the very least, Georgian Court and other places are areas of refuge. And my own uncle was a priest. So I do, have some respect for the ideals of the organization, not necessarily all of the practices, but certainly ideals. And Mary worship, can still be very, very powerful.
Yeah, indeed. And the Sisters of Mercy are legendary. And we even have a goth band from the 80s. So
Yes.
uh, we love that. Anyway, so I want to bounce forward into some of this stuff. There's something that I'm onto right now. And so this will all tie together. And this is not an interview, this is a conversation. So that's because that's the show's conversational. But I can't help but notice that we're skipping over into maybe, well, I don't know, Iceland pulls into this too, and you will have much to say on this, I'm sure. But this relationship with Scandinavia and, of course, Ireland, which is an island, and then the islands over there, this relationship with the sea and water. And I think it was in one of the few things I've heard of you out there talking about, but you said a certain someone, and I'm sure you'll get me straight here on this. The sea is the inheritance, and it was kind of a, I think maybe a flippant statement, but I was really struck by this statement, inheritance, and I put inheritance equals sea, water, and I was thinking about how profound that statement really is in the end, because the sea, the waters, the deep waters, the North Sea is known as like the harshest, the waves are the swells, everything. It's incredible how it plays with what is in there. And we really don't know in the end. And what does it house? And we understand now that water is its own being. It houses consciousness. It is a living thing. And of course, coming from the paganism side, we know that the elements all house this spirit, so to speak. So let's talk about the relationship between the Scandinavians, the Irish, and the waters.
What a fantastic way to start. So, the specific scene you're talking about is from the Battle of Clontarf, which was fought between Irish and Norse on both sides. It was an attempt to take Dublin. They did not take Dublin, but the specific scene you're referencing is that a bunch of Vikings, a bunch of Norse fighters in their heavy armor, got caught by the rising tide. And so that flippant statement was they are going into their inheritance. Their duchas is the Irish for it. They are going into their inheritance and drowning in the sea, kind of indicating that they are sea creatures. They are creatures of the sea. And Benjamin Hudson has done some really interesting work suggesting that Irish authors actually, in some cases, saw Vikings as sea creatures brought to life or coming from this swamp, coming from this mystical, wet otherworld to torment the Irish. So, very much in the Irish imagination, there's this combination of the Norse and the sea, which makes sense because while the Irish had boats before the Norse, of course, the Norse came with these huge, relatively huge vessels that could cross the open ocean, but also go really far upriver. And so that was a completely new ship technology for the Gaels, for the Gaelic Irish there. And so this sea change, no pun intended, of ship technology was intimately connected with the Norse. Now, when we talk about the sea in Northern Europe, many of us are used to seeing a Mercator map or a world map where the north of Europe is kind of stretched out. Iceland becomes this kind of smear. But if you take a look at a physical globe or at something like Google Maps, where you can manipulate and look at the world as a globe, you'll actually see that areas like Greenland and Western Norway and the Faroes and the Shetland Islands are actually relatively close to each other. They're not that far from each other if you're looking at the world as it actually exists. And we have to remember that before trains, before highways, the sea road was the fastest way to get around. So while we moderns tend to think of the North Sea, as you mentioned, as sort of this stretched out, very desolate kind of place, for the Norse, for the Irish who picked up that ship technology, the North Sea was a highway. It was their backyard essentially. It was almost their Mediterranean, as it was for the Romans. The sea promoted trade and it promoted travel and it promoted intercultural communication far more than we, always thinking of countries in terms of land. They saw themselves as sea kings.
It always feels that way when I think about any kind of island nation and, of course, the fjords and Scandinavia. And then one of the things I've always loved about this whole subject matter, which you have mastery in, is that there is a reverence for these things that I think other cultures, our modernized culture, has, and into the Victorian period, especially when fairies were turned into Tinkerbell and stuff like that, when these supernatural beings that lived in the land, and as you know, in Iceland and in well, all over. I mean, we've got the trolls, the rock people, we've got the fairy in this whole land, in this landscape of what you are focusing on. I still want to stay with the water. What is the relationship? What kind of supernatural things did you find or have you found in the old sources regarding things that were living in the water, things of the water that we may consider supernatural now, like for mer people, whatever, selkies, etc.
Well, Greg Darwin is the expert on Selkie lore, so I'll leave that to them. But the thing that immediately comes to mind is that in the Icelandic Landnámabók, the book of the settlement of Iceland, there's this tale of a magical horse that comes out of a lake and helps a farmer and then retreats back to the lake. And if you know anything about Irish or Scottish folklore, you recognize the Athishka, the water horse, or the Kelpie. And I'm not the very first person to point out that this Icelandic creature seems to be very Gaelic in origin, but it's one of many signs of Gaelic folklore being brought to Iceland. It's not just this Norse preserve. There's also a very significant Gaelic contribution to how they interact with their landscape.
There's been recently in modernity here, there has been a lot of stuff coming up with mer people. And some of it is very deep woo, but some of it for me looks very actually credible. And I think it was some Norse people in a submarine or doing some sort of survey in on the ground, at the ground level, the sea floor, and found some very intriguing stuff. And there's some images of what appear to be basically some sort of mer people. Are you familiar with any of?
I'm not. It does remind me of Doggerland, of this submerged continent, and how much archaeological information we can get from this submerged landmass between what's now Britain and Denmark. But I wouldn't know much about the sea people myself.
What can you say about Doggerland? Do you know?
Doggerland. Okay, so yes, I will not know the specific years off the top of my head, but we're talking thousands and thousands of years ago. There was a landmass between what's now Great Britain and what's now the peninsula of Denmark. And it gradually subsumed with the North Sea. And even now, sailors deal with the Doggerland Bank. It's because the water is relatively shallow. I believe it's something like only 60 feet deep. It can lead to some very hazardous sailing and boating conditions. But the thing is, because Doggerland filled up with salt water, it's done an incredible job preserving wooden implements that would otherwise have long since rotted away. And so, folks who do Doggerland excavations, they'll put down core samples, they'll put down practically nets and come up with all of these thousands of year old wooden objects that have been preserved by the seawater. It's really quite extraordinary.
I look forward to getting into that deeper at some point on my journey. And so also kind of in the same terrain, what about other supernatural things of the land in these locations? Is this any of this, because I haven't read the book yet because it's not out, even though I think, as you said, some people have received it. Is any of this making it into your book about this kind of stuff?
Absolutely, yes. I'm talking about the way that Landvatir, the spirits of the land, they travel with the people, but there's also Landvatir that exist on their own. There's this big thing in the sagas about how Iceland was inhabited by creatures before people ever went there. So we have both Landvatir that are brought by people as well as Landvatir that exist without the influence of people. But you kind of touched on, you said the rock people. So we have the Alvar in Iceland, the elves, and then in Ireland we have the she mounds. And just as there are rocks in Iceland that they will route highways around, and in Grundavik, my husband and I were able to see a fish factory that was constructed in an awkward U shape because it was around an elf stone. Similarly, in Ireland, people will intentionally build around or avoid building on she mounds, fairy raths, and other things that are supposed to be sacred to the spirits of the land. So in some ways, I'm sure it is a fairly universal phenomenon, but it's also another aspect of this Norse-Gaelic crossover that they both understood this idea that the land is not out to get you, but it's also not yours either. There are definitely certain places that you should not tread. You should leave it to the beings that are there that are not you.
I was fortunate to have had this reverence really instilled upon me by my mamo. And it was also something that felt natural. So, on top of her, I guess, promoting that, she also just allowed me to have my relationship without saying, this doesn't exist or that doesn't exist. So to this day, I see the world as a very magical place, nature and natural spaces. And of course, even in urban, because urban spaces are housed within nature and people don't realize that. And it makes it into literature and sci-fi and all that stuff. Poltergeist is a good example, over a burial mound and that,
Mm-hmm.
so I always, when I enter a space, I don't care how many times I've been to that space, I bring offerings and good tidings. I love to bring crystals and things like that, shiny, beautiful, natural things from other places that I think would be a good tiding to the spirits of that place. And these
Mm-hmm.
other, I think, species personally, because that was never pounded out of me, that dwell there, that just like anything, like cephalopods in the ocean, their camouflage may be at a different level in which we cannot perceive them. Some people may want to consider this a dimensional shift, a frequency shift, whatever it is. I know they're there, and I've had lots of experiences and conversations with people that feel this way as well. I think it takes getting in touch with, on base level, a tree, the ground below you. And once you start really tapping in, it interacts, it pushes back. And this is for good or bad. There are places you go and everything's like back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do
Yeah,
not
no, it's
enter.
not everybody wants you as a neighbor. Not
No
everybody
matter,
wants
yeah,
you in their space. Yep.
no matter how much reverence you have, it's still like, this is a no-go. You can leave your crystal right there and move on.
Yes, it's also really important, I think, to try to learn the language of that which you are attempting to, I don't want to say appease because it makes it sound like you're trying to get something done, but to make an offering for. For instance, where Kindred of Mann is located is part of Lenape-Hoking, the original space of the Lenni Lenape, and their nature spirit is Mising, and he takes tobacco. So we make an offering of tobacco when we make an offering for him, even if we're using mead and a sumbel or some kind of barley cake for an ithvert. That's not his language. His language is tobacco, so that's what we give. And then when I lived in Connecticut, their nature spirits there The Mohicans have the makiwisik, and they take cornbread. And so again, I feel it's really important to give them cornbread because even though I'm just, some white person giving them a gift, they'll be like, "Oh, this person took the time to find out what we're interested in." I think that's also really important to try to thank entities in the language that they speak.
Oh, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And food offerings and tobacco offerings are common things that I do as well. And fortunately, also, I had a grandmother that was very much in tune with this. She was, I thought, the way my story is, she's not actual blood, but she was Irish. And so she brought these ideas, to the table, and she didn't think twice about it. So she'd send me out. She had a very large yard, to a certain place in the yard where I'd give different food offerings.
Oh,
And
I
I
love
remember
that. Mhm.
one, oh, I ate something on the way to do that,
Uh-oh.
and I
Mhm.
got stung by a bee. The bee chased me all the way to the house
Oh
and
my gosh.
stung me right at the door. And she
Oh
knew.
dear.
Yeah, she knew.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, lesson 101. Um, that was these lessons are so great. And I do think what you're saying here is so important for people to really hear the reverence of understanding the language of these spaces and these places, and uh trying. And I think the effort of trying goes a long ways, even if you are not familiar or it's very strange territory. At least trying to open your mind and be aware that this particular land was Native American, and this is what inhabited this. This is how we grow as people.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
this is, I think, when we're looking at the work you're doing and the scholarship you're doing and so many other people, this is expanding our consciousness for the greater good.
I definitely think so. And to go back to this idea, sort of at the beginning of this conversation about the use of language and original language, it's not that I think the gods only understand Irish or only understand Norse, but taking the time to learn it so that you can make your offerings in these languages, makes the gods, makes the ancestors go, holy cow, this person took the time to learn our language. Wow. It's a sacrifice of your own time and your own effort. And it's such a matter of respecting the deities or the entities that you're petitioning, that you're talking to, that you're giving your gratitude for.
And so, with that said, what about this idea of your own, whatever you are out there as a listener, and we have a wide audience, of your own ancestral makeup? And again, I just stay out of these politics, but I think it's important that this thing that you're saying is important, because if we understand what's brought us to this moment, our ancestors, and honor them by honoring the others too, but in a way